Hey everybody. I wanted to take another minute to look at some of the other opening puzzles in The Witness and do a little bit more analysis of what the game does in terms of puzzle design and just overall gameplay flow. This is still kind of in preparation for a talk that I'm doing, so this may or may not go up. If you are watching this, then congratulations, it did go up. Anyway. So whether or not I talk super eloquently is kind of optional, right? Considering this is intended primarily for me. So obviously when you leave the opening area, you follow this path, and there's a path that kind of leads up to a little bit of a vista here where you can look out over the island and just kind of see what's out there. And partly I think this is here just to give you, you could say a reward, I guess, is what William Cheer would say. But it's, it's something for getting out of that area, right? To make you feel more like, oh, yeah, it's opened up into this big thing, and you understand, like, that there's a lot out there because you can see a lot from here, right? But also there's the nice aspect of that it sort of encourages you to look back this way and see this vault, right? And realize that you have kind of two options here, because if you were just sort of walking down a straight line, most people are probably just going to do this and like not even notice that that's there, which is fine because it's optional. But it is interesting to point out at least that there is a panel over here, which is at this point you don't know what anything on this panel means, and so it's a little bit overly complex for you to be able to do, right? Like if you're looking at it, you're like, oh, I don't know. This has got a bunch of different start places and like these dots that I don't know what they mean. I have no idea. And then there's these little hexagons or something. Yeah, I don't know what any of that means. And so it's designed to be a puzzle to teach you overall about the game, in that there are sometimes things that you're not going to be able to get the first time you come across them. And then, of course, you come out into this area where there is I guess I just want to kind of talk about what you see as you come out here. It's like very obviously you see a panel over here. There's also a panel over here. The barn certainly draws your attention, as does the strip of panels over here. So it's like pretty much what you're going to see. You're guaranteed to see the barn and see this. So most people are probably going to go over to these panels first, just because you're playing the game and ostensibly you're here to solve puzzles. So let's go solve some puzzles, right? Now this set of puzzles, I know Jonathan Blow has talked about a lot in terms of this being like something to show off from the game that's not particularly spoilery. So I may not have anything new to add here, but it's certainly worth talking about how the game introduces some of its simple, I guess you'd say, mechanics, right? So this is obviously set up as a sequence, right? There's a sequence of panels here that are all in a row. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 9 panels. Okay, so there's 9 panels in a row. And you go to 1, and this is pretty basic, right? There's only a few things you can do here. From the starting position, you can draw up, down, or straight through, right? And so that's really, there's only 3 options, and one of them is the right answer, right? So that type of thing is how this game does tutorialization, I suppose you could say, in that it's basically as straightforward and simple as you can make a puzzle, to the point it's basically not a puzzle even. But it's still a puzzle, right? And so you're learning by doing, right? Not sure. Okay, you can just do that. Oh, of course. I don't usually play with the mouse and keyboard, so it's interesting to use those controls. Anyway, so now we have a variation on this puzzle, right? Like it's the same layout, only you start and end in different spots, right? And again, you've got basically 1, 2, 3 options. Actually, I guess you have 4 if you do this, right? But you're probably not likely to do that because it's a little bit unusual. But you have more options, right? And so this is kind of intended to just give you a variation on this so that you can see it from a different way, right? So if you did that, you'd be like, oh, that's wrong. Because you might think, oh, maybe it has to do with like going horizontally. And so it's pretty clear that like it involves going between them, right? Between the white and the black. And so here again, you just have another thing that's like kind of expanding on that and saying, okay, well, like it's between the white and the black, right? So between the white and the black, doesn't matter like how many black there are. Like you don't have to do that, but you could do that, right? Is kind of, I guess, also the point, right? If you decided to separate those, then you would be like, oh, okay, like, because you could be thinking at this point, maybe all dots have to be separated. And then you might get to this point, and well, I can't separate all the dots because there's this middle point, right, that I can't cross through. So I guess maybe I group the black ones, right? So you start learning what the mechanic is just based off of the design of the panels, right? And they're very simple. There's not a lot of solutions to them. So I think it's worth pointing out that this is the first panel, I think, in this sequence that, well, that might be a little tricky in that there's only one solution, right? So this is sort of like ensuring that you know, okay, it's like group the blacks together. And then it's really just a matter of, you know, giving you slight variations on that theme, right? And of course, we're running along here, and you might choose to try to do this the same way. And this is to remind you, oh, wait, like maybe you need to think about where the end point is to, and so like winding might be a thing that matters, right? Even though like essentially you can draw the line here, it's just because the end point's not over here, it's over here, you have to like wind around so that you end up on the same side as the end point. And then you just have essentially more complex variations and things, and this is the first one to introduce having a blank space, right? And you as a player might be thinking, does the blank space matter? And maybe like you think at this point, I guess it has to go with white. And so we have a puzzle that is designed to require you to group it separately. Actually, how do you do this puzzle? Yeah, you do this. Again, winding, so it's like you might be doing this, so we'll encourage you to do different winding. But you'll notice like this little pattern, right, is on these, like all the panels are mostly the same, right, past this point. It's like this pattern, this pattern, this pattern, this pattern. So you get used to seeing this pattern, and because when you see this pattern over and over again, you're likely to do the same things. It's, you know, intended to play off of that, right? Like that you might do this that you did on the previous panel, and so it's to remind you, oh well, sometimes like you can separate into more than 2 groups, right? And then this is kind of about the white space, right? Because the way this goes, I mean, you have to wind it differently, but you also have to combine the white space with, or the blank space, why did I say white space? The blank space with the black dots, not the white dot. So you have to know that it works with both. And then this one is kind of your test puzzle, right? This should be the hardest puzzle in the sequence, because that's usually just how you would want to design this thing, right? It's something that tests all of your skills. So it's like, okay, so maybe I care about winding, and maybe like I care about multiple things or like grouping things. But really what this is playing off of is the way in which you can use blank space to combine things, right? Because this is on this side of the panel, and this is on the opposite side of the panel. And you've been separating it for the past 2 panels. In this panel, to solve it, of course, you have to combine it. And it's really as simple as that. But it's tricky, right? Because you haven't done that, right? Like it's a different concept. And so I think it's interesting and worth pointing out that, like, despite being, you know, a very simple set of puzzles that are not that difficult, each panel is introducing a different concept and explaining something, and by the end here, you should be a quote-unquote master of this idea, right? So now the player might, you know, is basically free. I mean, they've been free this whole time, but, you know, you could run off up there, or you could run off this way and see what's over anywhere. But if you were to go over here to this barn, which you saw earlier, which is likely because people tend to like to investigate things that they saw before that seemed interesting, then you find some more panels over here. And this is a set of 5 panels. Okay. They're different visual style to the other panels, which is kind of interesting, although I'm not sure what it has to do with anything other than the mechanic is different, and so it might be worth thinking about. It's interesting you can kind of access a panel even if it's turned off. So yeah, they also make different sounds, which is kind of cool. Yeah, so again, we have a very basic form of this. In some ways, this is a little more complex than the other panel, but there's really only a few lines we can draw. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think you can also do 5 or 6. So there's like 6 lines you can draw here. And there's 2 ways that you can solve this. I think this is interesting because this is one of the types of things where the game sort of just expects that you'll figure it out, right? Because you might not figure it out because it's expecting you to guess something that you have to draw through these lines. But it kind of just expects you to figure out. And it has the benefit of, you know, if you submit an answer and these are not happy, right? You didn't draw through these points. They flash, right? And so you might go try some different things, and it's like, well, that's flashing, so maybe, like, I need to hit both of them. So it kind of teaches you that, right? And then at this point, it's really just, it's such a simple idea, it's kind of like either you get it or you don't, right? And so this is just intended to be a slightly more challenging shape to draw, right? Or series of dots to go through. And then another slightly more challenging series of dots to go through because you have to think about different things, right? See, it's challenging enough that, like, even I screw it up. Even I. Yeah, because you have to go to the top. So a lot of times that's the way in which something can be a little counterintuitive, is if you have to go all the way to the other side of the panel and then back. A lot of times that's a little bit unintuitive, right? So these have just sort of been, you know, variations on that basic idea. And then this again is, which you've had this in the starting area before, right? So you've seen multiple start positions, and we know one of them might be right or one of them might be wrong. And so it's really, again, just like a variation on difficulty, right? Like we're sort of playing with the set of mechanics that you've seen before in order to create some interesting scenarios. And like this is probably as difficult as you can make this mechanic. It is interesting to point out that you like draw through a starting position on here, right? And I think probably to do this one you also have to draw through starting position. I'm not sure. Yeah, and this one is like interesting because we know it can't be here because I guess it could be there. No. Yes, okay. Alright, well, I was going to say, we know it can't be here, I guess, because it's on the line to here and the line away from there. So, like, if I am going to hit this one, I'd have to bump back into that. Or hit that one, I'd have to, on the other side, bump back into that. So we know it's not that. So it's really whether it's this. Well, it can't be that either because it's on this line, right? This corner here. The only way to get at it is that way or that way. And if we go that way, then, yeah. So it's, you can use deduction to figure out which one it can be, right? Like, rather than just trial and error. Okay. So those are introducing, like, very simple, basic mechanics, right? These hexagons that you have to go through, and the colored dots that you have to separate, black and white dots. So at this point, you can actually open this vault, right? You know everything that you need to open this. It's still a tricky puzzle, but you do know everything that you need to know to do it. And so it's relatively proximal to the information that's required to solve it. It's just kind of a super boss puzzle, right? And it's also designed to look very scary. But again, it's like you've got all these starting positions, but you can use a certain level of deduction to know which ones you can't use. It's like, well, I can't use this one because it's got that same problem of, like, I can't hit both these dots. Like, you're gonna have to go through that. We know that. I can't use this one because I have to hit this, and also these have to be separated. So again, it's got the same problem. This one I can't use because these have to be separated, and again, to separate them would require doing that. So it has to be this starting position, right? And, well, we kind of know we have to go right because if we're going to go left, then we can't hit that dot. And we have to go up because we need to hit that dot. And so at this point, it's kind of, I guess, just deduction, right? And we're likely to hit those dots that way. That seems fine. And then we know we can, like, separate that out. We can do that. And then, geez. Yeah. Nope, that's not right because we got a black dot in the center there. Shoot. So maybe this instead. There's still black dots in the center. This is a little tricky. Very tricky. Very tricky. Yeah, so I'm trying to, I'm not the best at deductive type thinking, and I guess most people aren't, but again, it's like, I guess this does kind of imply that you want to, like, separate that out, but the white is really what's confusing me. So maybe I go like this underneath that. There's probably a few different solutions for this particular panel. But yeah, so I've got white on this side. And it can't be that, though. It can't be that. So, like, that's wrong because I have to go through that corner. So I know it can't be that exit no matter what. So I might as well, like, do that, right? So maybe try the top left exit, right? So that's not working. Stuff is so tricky. I forget how hard these vault puzzles are. I think that doesn't work because we're in a black. So this is intended to be like a hard puzzle using basic mechanics, right? And it's hard for a lot of reasons, mostly just because it's complex. There we go. Anyway, so very complex, very challenging. And, you know, of course, for solving that, we're rewarded with a little safe of some kind, which you might look at and think, oh, well, maybe there's a thing to like do something with it. And then this is a little bit hidden, but obviously, like, oh yeah, everything in this game involves just tracing the lines. And then you get some information, right? Anyway, so didn't mean to spend that much time on that puzzle, but the point being that it's a difficult puzzle using just basic mechanics, right? So it's about as tricky as you could make one of those without getting just plain ridiculous. Because it's still interesting. There's lots of little interesting things to think about in it that you maybe haven't thought about before. And maybe that wasn't the best analysis of it. But it does have, for example, one of the things that it does is it requires you to think about multiple exits, right? And I don't actually think you needed to think about that on any of the other ones. So you have to think about multiple start points, multiple exits. Yeah, there weren't any other ones that required you to think about multiple exits too. And it has a few start points that you can deduce, and I guess you could probably deduce what exit you could go through as well. I didn't even think about that. Probably through the same methodology. I'm going to go back and look at it just to see, because I'm pretty sure you could probably deduce that it was this exit. Be quiet. All right, stop. Go outside. Perils of having a chihuahua. Okay. As they interrupt you. Anyway. Yeah. I feel like, oh yeah, it is a little bit lower now. Yeah, so like we could deduce that this was the start point. Should be able to deduce this is not the end point because the same reason. It's just in reverse, right? Like we can't end there and hit both those. I think we can deduce that this is not the end point as well, because there's no way to, well, I guess you could go around that way, right? Technically, so that could be the end point. It's kind of hard in this particular light to see this panel anymore. There we go. It's just the HDR blooming out the panel. Let's see, that could be potentially it, but we know it's not that, so we've eliminated it down to 2, right? And it's possible that you could solve it with both of those, right? Not sure, but it's possible. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. Yeah, so you can solve it here. I think I solved it there before. So you can solve it at either of the exits that are possible to solve it at. I mean, theoretically possible to solve it at. You are actually possible to solve it at. Okay. So I think I'm going to take a break. And then I will go look at the symmetry area, or the glass factory, I believe is what it's called. So we'll look at that. That'll be our next area to look at.